In traditional Western occultism, the tarot is recognized as the keystone of the whole philosophical system called Hermetism. It is very hard to discover its actual origin. The most competent and famous occult authors, like Eliphas Levi, P. Christian, Fabre d'Auvet, Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, Paracelsus, Oswald Wirth, Papus, Dr. Gerard N. Casse, and others, are of the opinion that the tarot's true symbolism comes from ancient Egypt. That master of Hermetism, Eliphas Levi, tells us this boldly in his Transcendental Magic, its doctrine and ritual. This clavicle, as he calls the tarot's arcana, regarded as lost for centuries, has been recovered by us, and we have been able to open the sepulchres of the ancient world, to make the dead speak, to behold the monuments of the past in all their splendor, to understand the enigmas of every sphinx, and to penetrate all sanctuaries. Now, this was the key in question, a hieroglyphic and numeral alphabet, expressing by characters and numbers, a series of universal and absolute ideas. The symbolical tetrad, represented in the mysteries of Memphis and Thebes, by the four aspects of the Sphinx, a man, eagle, lion, and bull, corresponded with the four elements of the old world, i.e., water, air, fire, and earth. Now, these four symbols, with all their analogies, explain the one word hidden in all sanctuaries. Moreover, the sacred word was not pronounced, it was spelt, and expressed in four words, which are the four sacred letters, Yod, He, Va, He. The tarot is a truly philosophical machine, which keeps the mind from wandering, while leaving its initiative and liberty. It is mathematics applied to the absolute, the alliance of the positive and the ideal, a lottery of thoughts as exact as numbers, perhaps the simplest and grandest conception of human genius. An imprisoned person, with no other book than the tarot, if he knew how to use it, could in a few years acquire universal knowledge and would be able to speak on all subjects with unequaled learning and inexhaustible eloquence. This passage, which is well known among occultists worthy of the word, is perhaps one of the best definitions of the tarot's value and greatness that we have. The enthusiastic discoverer of these keys to the ancient wisdom, pious magician and former priest, Eliphas Levi, in his private life, Abbé Constant, supplied us with this concise and inspired explanation. In the second half of the 19th century, Eliphas Levi was followed by a long succession of occultists who accepted the tarot as a basis for their investigations and writings. But none had so fiery a pen and such a burning conviction as he. Papus, in his The Tarot of the Bohemians, a classical book about the mystery of the major and minor arcana, tells us in a legend that the whole initiatory wisdom of ancient Egypt was recorded in the symbols of the tarot cards as a last attempt to preserve this wisdom for future generations, and was made just before Egypt was invaded and destroyed by the advancing hordes of the Persian king. These cards, originally made from metal or strong leather, were later used as a means for gambling, just as the Egyptian priests intended them. For they knew that human vice will never die, and so their mysterious cards were unknowingly used by the barbarians as a means of transmission, throughout subsequent ages, of the most sacred and hidden results attained by the old wisdom of Egypt. As I have said, many eminent occultists have written about and led intensive investigations into the tarot's philosophy and symbolism. Several of them are mentioned in the bibliography included in this book. The list is, of course, incomplete, as there are many others who to a greater or lesser degree were connected with the Hermetic tradition of occultism. But here there is neither the room nor the purpose to give any other names. For an understanding of the present book, it is essential to realize that I have tried to expound the tarot as a useful instrument of cognition, as Eliphas Levi described it, and at the same time to provide a practical manual, instead of just an exposition of the author's own views on the matter of Hermetism, for I look on the tarot as the algebra of occultism, which enables a man, who knows its use, to progress independently in a safe way, trace for us in these ancient arcana. I am a firm believer that when creating his work, a writer should, in the first place, aim for the usefulness of that work. This means that readers and students should be given full opportunity to apply the knowledge which is supposed to be in such a book. The mere expression of a writer's opinions about a subject and his description of it is not sufficient. There are many authors and each one is entitled to have his own particular conception. In my opinion, when expounding such a large and profound system of occult philosophy as the tarot undoubtedly is, the reader should be invited, to a certain extent, to cooperate with the author in the practical use of the teachings given in the text of the book. And that is what I have tried to do. If you attentively read the brilliant definition of Eliphas Levi at the beginning of this introduction, you may expect to get some knowledge of how to use the tarot. Therefore, firstly, I have collected the most essential matters for each arcanum, which have been partially taken from the classical works mentioned in the bibliography, but mainly from my own experience, derived from the years 1926 through 1933, when I studied Hermetism exclusively. At that time, I had a group of earnest students who studied the Book of Hermes, a name often used for the tarot's philosophy, for a long period, and we systematically went through the whole course, from the first to the last, 22nd, arcanum. Texts were read, explained, discussed, and their practical meaning was demonstrated and used in exercises, and notes were carefully taken. As a basis for the lectures, I used, apart from the works of other competent exponents, the unique book by Professor Gregory Osipovich Mebs, a leading authority on Hermetism in Russia prior to 1917. Actually, it was not even a proper book, but rather a series of lectures duplicated on very large sheets of thick paper, about 12 by 15, with all the diagrams made by the author's own experienced hand. It was never for sale on the open market as a book, and only a few initiated circles of students were lucky enough to get a copy. We bought ours from a Russian refugee who brought the book with him in 1919, when fleeing from his country, which had just fallen into communist hands. Gradually, as our knowledge grew in the course of 7 years spent on intensive study, I began to write my own work, which was intended to be a synthesis and condensation of all that we were able to learn about the tarot and its practical use. Under this use, I understand the application of ideas expressed in the major arcana. These are given under 3 veils, according to the 3 worlds recognized in the tarot's sister system, the Kabbalah, as being a guide to creative thinking, for the development of the ability of concentrated, deliberate thinking, for the direction of thoughts and feelings into channels as indicated in the arcana, and finally, as an approach to the ultimate mystery of Tarot Kabbalah magic unity, the unmanifested spirit, the Ansof, the unknowable. After the whole of the very considerable material was collected and put in order, the first 7 arcana were elaborated and written about in 1938. Then came a change in outer conditions, political as well as personal. I began to travel extensively, visiting other continents, including a period spent in India, and later, a long stay in Australia, so that there was not much time available for the long work necessary to complete the whole task. It is only now that the work, conceived more than 30 years ago, has come to realization in the form of the present book. At the present time, there is no adequate and original work in English dealing with the tarot, and the last major works in other languages are more than 50 years old. Only one of these, the previously mentioned encyclopedic course of Professor G.O. Mebs, seems to satisfy, to a certain extent, what I would term a practical exposition of the subject. Anyway, as far as I know, that eminent work is not available and can hardly be consulted. Therefore, when I finished Occultism and Spiritual Paths, other books being In Days of Great Peace and Concentration, the idea occurred to me to make use, now that I have the time, of material collected many years ago. Before he begins to work with this book, the reader is strongly advised to study Occultism and Spiritual Paths, because many introductory and technical points relating to the present work have been extensively explained in it, and therefore cannot be repeated here. Also, some important instructions in the realm of the practical use of occult powers, such as defense against any hostile influences, have been expounded in concentration.